Humans were more or less convinced that the world ended just over the visible horizon, and that the gods and the heavens revolved around them, and that everything had meaning, everything had purpose. If you were in their place during those times, what would you think when you saw the comet fragments come streaking down out of the sky? Consider what we know about the Younger Dryas, about that tumultuous period that happened at the end of the Ice Age, a period that we undoubtedly witnessed as a species. And then consider these passages from chapter 8 of the book of Revelations, and ask yourself, what is it that's really being described here? Quoting loosely from the book of Revelations, chapter 8. I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. The angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from heaven. It fell on a third of the rivers and springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood. So many of the people died from the waters because they had been made bitter. The fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone for not a third part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. End quote. These descriptions continue in Revelations 9, verses 1 and 2. Quote, The fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. End quote. Sounds like a pretty lurid description of cosmic impacts and their aftermath effects to me, all personified and attributed to supernatural beings. Think about it. If you were a few generations removed from this event, you probably wouldn't remember a story about a very cosmically unlucky day where bad stuff happened. But once you wrap the tale up in religion, you personify it, you deify it, you put structure around the event, it becomes something that is much more likely to be remembered and to be retold. The fallout from such an event would have had global consequences, and these consequences would have endured for months on end. The sun would have been blacked out for a long time, earthquakes, fire, and flood would have raged across the planet. There are many other passages that describe what are essentially the secondary effects that would have resulted from gigantic cosmic impacts. This is Revelation chapter 6, verse 12. Quote, When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood. End quote. Up and down the Bible, from the Old Testament to the New, there are many descriptions of events that can easily be interpreted as first-hand accounts of cosmic disasters. Here's Joel chapter 2, verses 31 and 32. The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. Isaiah chapter 29 verse 6, quote, Thou shalt be visited of the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest and the flame of devouring fire. End quote. The famous Sodom and Gomorrah story, which comes from the 19th chapter of Genesis, quote, Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. End quote. Another example from 2 Peter 3 verses 10 to 13, quote, But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. End quote. Talk about harnessing global tragedies for your own ends, with all the talk of whereth dwelleth righteousness. Righteousness dwelleth where we say it dwelleth, damn it. The principle of never let a good disaster go to waste clearly isn't just a modern political technique, it's just human nature. We've been harnessing these types of events for millennia. There are other religious texts outside of Christianity that also seem to capture the essence of what it might have been like to directly witness such a cataclysm. The Vedic texts, the Sanskrit epics of ancient India, in particular the Mahabharata, are quite literal. Indeed, they even call out the destruction caused by meteor storms specifically. And once again, note with these quotes, the description of what I can only interpret as cosmic impacts has been deified and personified into tales. And in this case, they describe the whole process as a mythological cosmic weapon called the Brahmashisha Astra, something that was capable of killing gods, and it functioned by unleashing a literal swarm of meteors. In Mahabharata, it's explained when this weapon gets invoked, quote, "It blazes up with terrible flames within a huge sphere of fire. Numerous peals of thunder were heard, thousands of meteors fell, and all living creatures became terrified with great dread. The entire sky seemed to be filled with noise and assumed a terrible aspect with flames of fire. The whole earth with her mountains and waters and trees trembled." End quote. Other quotes from the Mahabharata. Various omens appeared among the gods. Winds blew, meteors fell in thousands. Thunder rolled through a cloudless sky. Drona called Arjuna and said, "Accept from this irresistible weapon called Brahmastra, but you must promise never to use it against a human foe, for if you did, it might destroy the world." At last they came to blows, and seizing their maces struck each other. They fell like falling suns. End quote. Some more verses from the Mahabharata. "It was a single projectile, charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Anhakas." End quote. And this is perhaps my favorite quote from all of these, again from the Mahabharata, quote, "These will all take place at the end of the Yuga, and when men become fierce and destitute of virtue, then does the Yuga come to an end. The course of the winds will be confused and agitated, innumerable meteors will flash through the sky foreboding evil, and then the sun will appear with 6 others of the same kind, and all around will be din and uproar, and everywhere there will be conflagrations, and fires will blaze up on all sides when the end of the Yuga comes." End quote. I find it pretty interesting here that there are described 7 suns in the sky in the Mahabharata, and in Revelations we have 7 angels with trumpets. Perhaps this means there were 7 major impacts during the Younger Dryas, and certainly the latest research points to multiple impacts happening during this period. What about some other religions from across time or from around the world? Well, the Mayan codices state, quote, "At the close of the ages it hath been decreed, the world shall be purged with fire." End quote. From the indigenous traditions of Brazil, quote, "Monan, without beginning or end, author of all that is, seeing the ingratitude of men and their contempt for him who had made them thus joyous, withdrew from them and sent upon them Tata, the divine fire, which burned all there was on the surface of the earth." End quote. Also the Nordic traditions, this is the Elder Eddas, quote, "Surt from the south comes with flickering flame. The sun darkens, earth in ocean sinks, fall from heaven the bright stars. Fire breath assails the all-nourishing tree, towering fire plays against heaven itself." End quote. These analogies to cosmic impacts are just endless. Daniel G. Brinton wrote in The Myths of the New World, which was published in 1868, about the tribes of South America, quote, "By far the greater number represent the last destruction of the world to have been by water. A few, however, attribute it to a general conflagration which swept over the whole earth, consuming every living thing except a few who took refuge in a deep cave." End quote. The more you look into these creation stories, the more a consistent set of events or a consistent set of themes seems to emerge. We have descriptions that seem to be bearing witness to the asteroid or the comet fragments themselves actually entering the atmosphere, with talks of mountains ablaze with fire, or of stars falling from the sky and burning like torches. We also have many descriptions that concern what is essentially the aftermath of such an event. Cataclysmic wildfires, earthquakes, violent electrical storms, seemingly unending periods of rainout, the blackout of the sun, the moon and the stars, along with just general destruction and mayhem. All of which, as modern scientific evidence shows, actually took place during the Younger Dryas. And of course, there were tidal waves and there was flooding. Flooding like we could barely even imagine, even with the assistance of Hollywood. It's no wonder that tales of apocalyptic flooding are perhaps the single most prevalent theme amongst all of these creation stories.